Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one is going to be for Book 3 Fire, Episode 19, Sozin's Comet Part 2, The Old Masters. This one's animated by Moy Animation. It is the one part of the finale that is animated by them. And yeah, interesting. I think just the decision in that, like, realistically, if you were picking that from the start, you'd probably be like, Moy do the first part and then JM do the other three because they're much more important than the first part. But as we've really discovered in the last few episodes, Moy are a really good animation studio. There's no real issue with the second studio here. But yeah, this is an instant improvement over the first part. Not that the first part of the finale is bad by any means, but it's just that necessary setup. Here, it's like the really good setup stuff of, like, the episode title is effectively what the episode is about, and that is the characters, the younger characters especially, basically getting advice from the old masters. So Aang getting advice from the past lives, and then the Line Turtle. It's Zuko getting advice from Iroh. It's, you know, the whole team basically in a way meeting as well the other old masters in the Order of the White Lotus, and to some degree getting advice for them, and just the setup of who's going where in the battles, which characters are going to be fighting which other characters, and putting everyone in position for when the comet, you know, arrives at the end. They're there and thereabouts, and we're ready to go. And it's just really cool that the finale is really split up that way. It's just like the first two episodes are set up, the second episode ends with the comet basically here, and then the last two episodes are just there to have the action play out as we need it to. So it all works out really nicely in that way. But yeah, we start off, of course, with June, and they introduce themselves. Some nice references to that episode, the original episode, of course, Bottom of the Water Tribe, where they met her before. But they quickly move on and are like, okay, here's Aang's staff, Nyla, find Aang. And June reveals to us that, okay, we can't find him, he's gone. And they kind of make the clarification here of just like, no, he's not dead, he just doesn't exist. That we could find him if he was dead, but he just doesn't seem to be here at all, full stop. So again, as I brought up in the last video, interesting note about the Line Turtle, and I'll bring it up a little bit later on, of just they seem to have very, very special powers beyond just energy bending. That there seems to be just inherently, like, mystical kind of creatures that have powers beyond just, like, they can transfer bending to people, they can energy bend themselves, and can do the usual things that Line Turtles can do. That there seems to be, to some degree here, this kind of idea that they can kind of hide people on them or cloak them, which potentially is part of the reason for why, like, spirits maybe were unable to get at humans during the previous era, in that it wasn't just that humans lived on the backs of Line Turtles, but that Line Turtles almost like cloaked the presence of humans on the back of Line Turtles and made it so that they were almost invisible to spirits, even if spirits wanted to do anything. But, you know, I already explained that in the last video, just want to note it here once again. So they immediately turned then from like, okay, we're just going to have to hope that Aang does what he needs to do. The only other person we can, you know, use Nyla for, June and Nyla for, is to find Iroh. And so Zuko reveals that he has the sandal that he kept from, I can't remember the exact episode, because Zuko's plots are always like the B plot of episodes, but it's obviously the one where Iroh gets captured by the Earth Kingdom people after he does like the bathing in the hot tub, and then they have the big, you know, cool chain fight at the end. He kind of distracts himself and goes off after them. Is it Bottom of the Water Tribe? I'm not sure. Either way, it's the episode where he gets captured. And anyway, so what happens is, it's not Bottom of the Water Tribe actually, but they basically arrive just outside Ba Sing Se. That, like, they're on the outskirts of it. Of course, the wall's kind of been taken down, so they're not kind of fully in Ba Sing Se, but they're just there. And in the middle of the night, they are basically, you know, who arrives, but all these old characters. It's Boomy, Piandao, Zhang, Paku, and they're just all there, and it's like, wait, what's going on here? I think anyone who's been aware of it could obviously figure out the fact that, okay, they clearly have White Lotus kind of symbols on them. But because the Order of the White Lotus has only really been mentioned in the series like a couple of times, like it's so well known at this point now that everyone has seen the series that it's just easy to figure out. But I think even at the time it was a bit like, okay, we've had like one or two allusions to the Order of White Lotus, but like it's never been presented as like this huge aspect of the series. But all of a sudden, it's like all these characters are a part of it, and they say that as such. It obviously begs the question of like, how did all these characters come to join it? The details surrounding the origins of this group. A lot of stuff we just, to this day, still don't actually know about the Order of the White Lotus. It's still very mysterious. Like, I often complain about Book 3 of Korra, and the fact that the Red Lotus are very underdeveloped. But the White Lotus are kind of the same. It's just that they're a little bit more interesting because there are so many known characters within the group. Just, you know, Boomy, like, how did he go from being like 12-year-old Boomy, the kind of crazy mad genius? Where did he join the White Lotus in between those times? Like Paku up in the north, when did that happen? Zhang, like, did that come after he deserted the Fire Nation military, or was that a before thing? With Iroh, of course, we pretty much kind of have to know, like, he was probably part of this group before, you know, what happened to Liu 10 happened. Just because very much like little bits and pieces throughout really suggest that no, it wasn't just a sudden change of heart for Iroh. He was always more or less the spiritual balance, you know, character that he is now. It's just that I suppose the death of Liu 10 made him go much heavier into kind of that side of things. And it's the same with like Piandao, like where did they all come together in this way? Like, you can sort of figure out that, like, okay, maybe if Iroh is like been in this group for a long time, maybe when he went to study waterbenders, it was actually that he went up north, and that's where he met Paku, and maybe like Iroh assisted Paku in joining the White Lotus. Maybe he assisted Zhang after leaving the military with joining the group. That sort of thing we just don't know. Like, Boomy obviously is the oldest of the group there, so, you know, realistically he's been in it the longest, but, you know, who's kind of the leader of the group at that point then? Or is Boomy a more recent addition? Like, there's a lot of questions, of course, because they never go into, like, the origins of this group, how long it's been around, and, like, how exactly it's run, because they always just say it's a secret society. But either way, it's a great use of all these kind of old master characters. I love the introduction scene of everyone. Paku revealing that he's married to Kana, and that he's going to be their grandfather. Fun little interaction of course, he gets along really well with Katara, but doesn't have a lot of time for Sokka. Sokka obviously goes straight over to Piandao. Would have liked a reference to the fact that Zuko also kind of trained under Piandao, but, you know, it sort of comes across that they know each other just from the fact that, like, Zuko asks Piandao, like, directly, like, where's my uncle? So it gets across that familiarity without, I suppose, Zuko just coming out and saying, like, in the same way that Sokka does, like, you know, master, which he actually is. But it's just a nice use of that. Katara introduces Zuko to Zhang. Obviously, Zuko doesn't know him. And, of course, Boomy as well. You know, would have liked a little bit more focus on Boomy. Like, I suppose it would have been nice to get the, you know, the stuff from Boomy versus Toph Round 1, the comic. It would have been nice to get to see a little moment between the two of them in the show. Just to see the voice acting of, like, the two of them being introduced to each other. Of, like, you know, whoever introduces, like, maybe, like, Sokka or something like that says, you know, here's Boomy, he's, like, the best earthbender in the world. And then immediately setting off the idea of, like, they're both arguing for that title. That would have been a nice thing to do there, but there's obviously not a lot of time. The introductions have to be kept short to get to the key moments of, obviously, the big reunion, Zuko and Iroh. And this is, I think, for sure one of the most well done, like, emotional moments in the show. It's for sure a highlight moment of just, they've been apart for a long time now. Obviously they had the talk in 306, but obviously that was a big, like, huge reveal moment for Zuko, but he hadn't fully like made his mind up at that time. And here he is. Here we are, like what, 13 episodes later, and finally, it's a point where Zuko has found his path, has come to apologize to Iroh, but is having all these doubts about, I betrayed Iroh exceptionally hard. I was awful in what I did to him. He shouldn't forgive me, but obviously, like Katara says, like, if he acknowledges that you've changed, he will forgive you. And it's just so well done. He waits. He doesn't want to wake Iroh up because he's asleep. And immediately it's just like Zuko gets very emotional, wants to apologize for everything he's done. And Iroh just, forces him into the hug. And what he says, it's just so well like written, in the idea of like, I was never angry at you. I was just sad that you'd lost your way. And in a way, the silent treatment was just that, like, you had lost your way and you needed to get it back yourself. I can only guide you so much. You had to make that decision yourself, and now you finally have. And you are the person that you need to be. You found your destiny, finally. And that's all that was needed. There was never a huge, like, rift between Iroh. It wasn't anger at what Zuko did. It was sadness that he kind of chose the wrong path. So I've always liked that about Iroh, that he's never, outside of I think one or two moments, been like, Zuko, this is your destiny, you have to go down this path. The whole blue spirit bit back in Lake Laogai, I think, was obviously one of the moments where Iroh was just very frustrated with Zuko. But outside of that, he's always been like, no, it's important for you to find it yourself. That way, you truly have found it, and it's not just basically, I suppose from Iroh's perspective, like, Ozai's kind of forced this destiny upon you. I don't want to be the one to force this other destiny that I think you should have on you. You have to decide for yourself what your destiny is. And he makes that decision here. And in a way, like, it's almost a more important scene, what happens after that. That's the big emotional reunion. But it's the planning around the campfire kind of scene that's, in a way, like, one of the most important of the episode, because this is the one where we get kind of, I suppose, the goal of Zuko's destiny. Like, Zuko's destiny, like, side with the Avatar, help him to end the war. But then what? What's the next step? The next step, obviously, is that Iroh presents it here. And I think it's so interesting that it's more or less for one of the first times that we've really got this. And it in a way seems so obvious that this is, of course, kind of what had to happen. But you're almost not really thinking about it with Zuko. And that's just the idea that, like, no, like, Iroh is not going to take over as Fire Lord. It has to be you, Zuko. And I love the way they do it, that he doesn't name him immediately. He's just like, it has to be an idealist with, like, unquestionable honor. It has to be you. And it's just like, what a perfect way to just kind of, like, give him this end goal for his character arc of, like, you started this series wanting to get your honor back from your father. You've got it back yourself. Now, the fact that you are such an honorable person is why you have to be the Fire Lord. You have to get, once Ozai is defeated, you have to step up and take the throne and basically right the wrongs of the Fire Nation and, restore its honor. Like, what a cool just way to bring it full circle of just, like, Zuko is the honorable one now. He has to be the one to, restore the honor of his nation, basically, going forward as its ruler. And I like as well that it also explains why Iroh is not going to step up as Fire Lord, and that he acknowledges that to the outside world, how would it look if I was the one to defeat my brother and take power? It'd just look like, brother kills a brother to assume power. And then, because I suppose they come from, like, the same generation, even though Iroh is part of the Order of the White Lotus, and everyone who knows him would probably acknowledge that he's probably very suited to be the leader, just the fact that he's kind of, the current Fire Lord's brother and participated in all these wars and was on the wrong side, I suppose, initially, it kind of, in a way, means that, like, he can't ever just be the full-on ruler of the Fire Nation. So I like that kind of explanation, that Iroh has accepted that that's not going to be his position, that it's never something he really wanted, and he's found his own destiny now. And that I like that it's here. They just at the end reveal that, the reason in the past I was so devoted to taking down Ba Sing Se, the siege, the massive, how long that siege was, that ended up with the death of his son, is because he had this, dream, this vision in the past, that he knew that one day he would take Ba Sing Se. He just initially misinterpreted it as like taking it from the Earth Kingdom for the Fire Nation. Instead, the actual destiny is the reverse. Take it away from the Fire Nation and give it back to the Earth Kingdom. And I like that as just like, that's Iroh's goal for the finale. He and the White Lotus are going to take back Ba Sing Se. Zuko and Katara are going to go after Azula because, that's going to be the fight for the throne, basically. Aang's going to deal with Ozai, which means that once Ozai's gone, Azula is going to be the assumed, next ruler of the Fire Nation. You have to be there to take her down and assume the throne. But she's dangerous. You need someone else with you. So Zuko asks Katara to go with him, and I like it because it fits in that Katara has some, a reason to kind of want to fight Azula because she nearly killed Aang. And now that she's kind of made amends with, one, I suppose, half of like why that happened initially, Zuko, now it's time to deal with the other half of the person who actually harmed Aang in that way. So that's an immediate setup there. Also, I suppose there's an element of like, she had the advantage over Azula in their previous fight, and if it wasn't for the Dai Li and all the craziness going on, she would have had Azula in that fight back in Ba Sing Se. So there's that to it. So it's a very fitting one that like it's not just a random choice. But then it does leave like Sokka, Suki, and Toph like, what's our destiny for this fight? And Iroh just says, what do you think it is? And Sokka's like, we have to take out the airships. That's the way we can help. So that's the airship team. They're going to try and take down as many airships as possible because Ozai's Burning Earth plan involves using firebending from airships to destroy the Earth Kingdom. So just setting up everything perfectly in terms of where our characters are going to be, but they're also placing their hope in Aang, that like they do all have to just hope that he'll be there to fight Ozai. If not, it's going to be this kind of everyone just, like hope that their mission goes well and that they can come together and take out Ozai. So they're all reliant on Aang, and of course getting into the Aang side of the episode, of course he's wondering where he is. He does bending and realizes he's not in the spirit world, otherwise he wouldn't be able to bend. Momo's with him, of course. The ground isn't made of earth, so he gets a bit confused, but ends up meditating and realizing that who he can ask for advice on what to do if he faces Ozai are the past lives. So he talks to Roku, of course, who he has the connection to, and this is a really great sequence as Aang talks to each of the last 4 lives, so one for each element, and in order as well. So Roku first, then Kyoshi, then Kuruk, then Yang Chen. He gets a piece of advice, a piece of wisdom from each of them as they kind of reflect on basically wisdom they learned from their life that they can pass on to Aang. And it's meant to, help him as the Avatar, but it doesn't really help him himself personally as like an air nomad. So it's this weird situation where Aang obviously had hoped they had like a kind of get out of jail free kind of card for him. But the advice that they offer is kind of basically that, as the Avatar, you just have to be decisive and like you have to perform the justice. You have to make this decision because you're the Avatar. And, Roku's advice is basically, you have to be decisive because I wasn't, and that kind of is what caused the war in the first place. Kyoshi basically reflects on her role in what happened to Chin and basically says that, I realized that this is what had to be done. It was, only through justice can there be peace. And she took Chin out. I think with the Chin one, like reflecting on it now, knowing the full context behind that, they tell that story a little bit weirdly in that like, oh, Kyoshi's like, oh yeah, I did it. In that like, no, the full story behind that is that basically Kyoshi seemingly stayed out of dealing with Chin until like right at the end. That the only places left to be conquered were basically, Kyoshi Island, Kyoshi Village at the time, and Ba Sing Se. and he chose to tackle Kyoshi first before bossing Sei, but the whole rest of the Earth Kingdom he had under control. So like Kyoshi kind of saying the advice of like, do what I did and like act quickly and in justice, and not like, no, she kind of waited until he came to her and to deal with that. But that's just, technicality. Her advice is, right here, in that like as the Avatar you have to do what is justice for the world. And Aang makes the clarification of just like, oh, but this is about killing people. Technically you didn't kill Chin, you just did bending near him and he happened to stay where he was and fall into the water. But Kyoshi basically says, okay, that's what happened, but as far as I'm concerned, my intent was, if I needed to, I would have killed him. And that's just, Aang obviously jokes afterwards like, I shouldn't have asked Kyoshi, because they're so kind of different in their approach. Karuk is very interesting, because obviously, like, for us as the audience, like, without the Escape from the Spirit World stuff, which at the end of Escape from the Spirit World, even though it happens before this, they do have the kind of caveat thing of like, oh, and you won't remember any of this. So even though technically we know Karuk, and like Aang has met him before, his memories of that meeting in reconnecting with the Avatar spirit in between the books is gone. So this is effectively his first meeting once again with Karuk. And I like it. It's this idea of like, he was this go with the flow Avatar. He didn't really actively perform his role all that much. He just kind of felt that like, oh, in this era, everyone's kind of dealing with their own problems. There's nothing huge for me to do. Maybe he ignored some things. Obviously we don't get a full explanation of any of this, because he just basically says, like, everyone figured out their own problems. And then Ko basically, as punishment, took the face of the person I was about to marry, who is Umi, who we know about her story. And he was kind of punished for it, which obviously begs the question of like, what's the relationship between Ko and the Avatar? Why did Ko punish Karuk for not being active as the Avatar? Like, why was he kind of justified in having that punishment? Karuk seems to acknowledge that, like, yes, he should have been a more active Avatar, but they don't really give an explanation for, like, necessarily if that was a huge problem, which obviously is something with Karuk that they could expand upon at some point, in that, like, were there little conflicts, were there bits and pieces there and around that he did let happen, and the world did maybe become a more like violent place, or there's more conflict during his era, or what? That's the sort of stuff that we don't necessarily know. I suppose given what we know about Yang Chen, it's probably some sort of a case where like she was basically era of peace almost throughout her run as the Avatar, and perhaps Karuk, starting in an era of peace, kind of let that slip away, and there was some conflict that came back, so he was punished for it. Not really sure, but just, him basically giving the advice to Aang, you must actively shape the course of, your destiny and thus the fate of the world. Just kind of letting him know that, like, Aang has to be decisive, he has to perform justice, and he has to, actively make a decision and shape the fate of the world going forward. So he obviously comes to Yang Chen, the other air nomad Avatar that we know of. And she obviously gives the best advice, because she understands Aang's perspective as an air nomad and the conflicting ideals of being an air nomad versus what is expected of Aang as the Avatar, in that he's expected as the Avatar to kill people, but as an air nomad he's expected to respect all life, even if it is Ozai. And I like how Yang Chen initially is kind of very blunt with Aang, of just like, it's not about you, it's about the world. That you have to put the world above yourself, and that's her advice. What is it? Selfless duty calls us to sacrifice our own spiritual needs to protect the world. Really well worded there, to get across the idea of like, you have to be selfless in this situation. You have to put everyone else above yourself, even if that goes against your own spiritual needs. You have to go against that if that's what's required to protect the world. So in a way, that's like the perfect advice for Aang as the Avatar, who's always kind of to some degree been the only thing that would get in the way of him doing his duty, is that he oftentimes prioritizes his kind of care for individual people around him over the fate of the world. He's for the most part gotten past that, but this is that on like a huge scale of like him you know, potentially like the worst scenario here is that he has an opportunity to kill Ozai, doesn't take it, loses, and the world goes into an even darker place. And that, in a way, is kind of like tragic, you know, if something happened to Aang, but it will be of his own making, because he chose his own kind of you know, ideals basically over what was required, even though he had an opportunity. So that's the advice he gets here, and he's obviously not happy with it, which I like. I like that he doesn't just immediately be like, oh, I'm happy with that advice. He is very conflicted now that all 4 avatars from each of the 4 nations have told him basically the same thing, and he more or less, I think, reluctantly accepts that, like, I'm gonna have to do this, haven't I? Kill him. But obviously, it's then that they arrive at the, you know, section of the Earth Kingdom that the fight's gonna take place, which I think is the big question here about the Lion Turtle. The Lion Turtle knows that Ozai is going to be here. The Lion Turtle, like, leaves Aang there at the end and goes off saying, you know, like, wait for him, he will come. Suggesting that Lion Turtles, to some degree, can predict the future, or can sense that something is about to happen and know where, like, intervention is required. Now, you can go back and basically apply this to almost everything that the Lion Turtles have done, in terms of, like, they knew that humanity was in risk once the spirits came into the physical world, and so allowed the humans to live on their backs. That must have been, to some degree, something they predicted would happen. They must have, to a degree, predicted that the Avatar would come into play, hence why they are fairly okay with giving, like, Wan the element, and then going along with the Rava and Wan plan of giving them all 4 elements over time. And once the Avatar is in play and what's happened has happened, they leave kind of, to some degree, acknowledging that the Avatar is now performing the role that we would perform, and we'll go off into the kind of distance and just kind of watch from afar. But obviously, one comes back into play here, I assume, because this Lion Turtle acknowledges that this is a kind of turning point in history, in a way, that if this Lion Turtle doesn't act, the world could go into a really, really dark era. So that's why a Lion Turtle comes in to help Aang, even though they had left initially saying that, like, we won't give bending anymore, we're basically leaving you with the Avatar, and they come back here to help an Avatar. So it's interesting. Obviously, what we need to at some point get, I think, is some level of understanding for the goals, aims of the Lion Turtles, because you can't just treat them as animals because they can talk, like, psychically to some degree, or actually they can talk. Suggesting that they are, like, basically fully sentient beings on more or less the same level as humans. They're in the form of a Lion Turtle. So that's very different than, like, a Sky Bison, who have, like, power, or animals with, like, special powers, dragons, you know, badger moles, animals that have basically bending powers. But then there's the Lion Turtles, who are, like, sentient, have seemingly, like, some level of, like, you know, almost like psychic abilities, being able to predict the future, being able to, like, entrance people onto them, you know, grant energy bending and all that sort of stuff. That there are these other abilities that they have. And I think that's what makes them so interesting and fascinating. Because when Aang goes around and realizes that it's a Lion Turtle, and he has a discussion, he immediately, I think, in asking the Lion Turtle, is acknowledging and basically more or less telling the audience that it is a kind of known thing within the Avatar world that a Lion Turtle is more than just an animal. In that, you know, in the sense of, like, they went to the dragons, but they couldn't really ask the dragons a question. The dragons, like, visually kind of, you know, gave them a kind of symbolic answer to what, like, firebending truly is. But Aang seemed to be aware of the fact that he could actually ask a Lion Turtle a question and expected an actual, like, answer in English, basically. Which I think is an interesting kind of point, that they're these kind of legendary, almost extinct animals as far as we're aware, but it's a known thing that you can talk to them, which super interesting, just that little point. But yeah, he asked the Lion Turtle the question of, like, you know, I'm expected to kill, even my past lives expect me to kill, what should I do? And the answer, of course, as everyone knows, is probably one of the most quoted lines from Avatar. It's the kind of mantra of energy bending in a way. It's what we later get is effectively like the ideals you need to have within yourself to perform energy bending effectively without, it backfiring on you. And what's the quote? It is, the true mind can weather all lies and illusions without being lost. The true heart can tough the poison of hatred without being harmed. Since beginningless time, darkness thrives in the void and always yields to purifying light. So immediately, the idea of like mind and heart, which more or less refer to the points at which the Lion Turtle touches Aang to give him this like insight, touching the insight chakra and the air chakra, which is the one at the heart, which is pretty interesting that it's given to an airbender heart chakra, and an insight chakra we've known has like the effect of like you can kind of embed information within like spirits and so on. So that's effectively how I suppose the Lion Turtle gives Aang the ability of this element. And it, I suppose, explains as well, insight chakra is also how fundamentally everyone is given the ability to bend in the first place, because that's how all Lion Turtles grant humans the ability. So that's just a cool little thing of just like insight, but also like knowledge as well. So, we're left with this idea of like Aang seems content with what the Lion Turtle has told him. We obviously later find out that the Lion Turtle told him a little bit more than we actually heard. And even, I suppose, by the end of the series, there's obviously the potential that the Lion Turtle had told him even more than that. But just that he seems happy with the idea of like what's going on here. And, to a degree, obviously, like they still explore the idea of like Aang, should he kill Ozai or not? But he obviously knows going into that battle that he has this kind of new ability. It's just, will he get an opportunity to use this ability, or will he be in a situation where he kind of has to kill or be killed type thing? So it's an interesting one in that this kind of mysterious advice that we as the audience are not really sure what to make of has suddenly kind of given our main hero the confidence needed to go into the final battle, and he's there waiting in the kind of the field of pillars basically for Ozai to come, because obviously Ozai's coming from the Fire Nation to the Earth Kingdom, so you get an idea of where the location's playing out. But of course, how did the Lion Turtle know that this would be the exact path that Ozai would come through to give them this confrontation? That's the big question about the Lion Turtles. How did they know that this was going to happen unless they could predict the future or sense what's going to happen in the future? That's the big thing with the Lion Turtles that is almost sometimes forgotten, that they know more than anyone seemingly. That I don't think we've even had spirits necessarily that can like predict the future in that way, but the Lion Turtles can. And that might explain why they are considered like ancient ones, even by the likes of Rava. But that's the Lion Turtle discussion. I've had that many times before, separate discussions. This is the Old Masters episode review. So yeah, that's been the episode review. And yeah, well, 2 more to go. But yeah, that's been the one for the second part of the finale. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But yeah, thanks for watching, and bye.